G'day everybody. I'm known only as the accumulator of information. You can call me the accumulator. I'm a government operative that investigates supernatural hotspots, global aerospace infrastructures, and locations where conspiracies take place.
And you can call me the astronaut. I am the accumulator's assistant. We met when he interviewed me disguised as a newspaper journalist. I've participated in prominent space explorations over the past 15 years at least. Many of these you will have never heard of due to their covert nature.
And welcome to episode 4 of our podcast,
Starlight Network!
One night as a very little boy, I looked at my window beside my bed, seeing something I'd never seen before. A big bright light speeding through the sky like a weird satellite going out of complete control. The time I thought what I really saw was a meteor crashing to Earth. Turns out that the big bright light, as a matter of fact, a shiny glimmer ray. Starlight, not that I imagine a starlight shooting through the sky, a starlight. After my experience, I intend to tell that story to you. Starlight Network. The following program is classified adults only. Contents and subjects contain statistical information regarding supernatural events that are scary for children and some certain individual young adults. In Starlight Network, we are going to be talking about supernatural disturbances during space exploration missions and UFO sightings, haunted houses, unexplained disappearances, ghost encounters, poltergeists, conspiracy theories in history, and espionage. It is our duty to investigate and substantiate the truth hiding in plain sight of each subject, which we tend to report individually and collectively. Our top investigation on Starlight Network this week is searching for the truth about whether Adolf Hitler's top-secret UFO project was fact or fiction. This episode will go into detail about Nazi Germany. Any listeners who may find this upsetting may want to skip this episode. It also feels important in the current political climate to make it very clear that we at Starlight Network condemn Nazis and fascism wholeheartedly. We also condemn the recent rise in neo-Nazi behaviour and consider it to be a tragic step backwards in humanity's collective journey.
It has been officially known since World War II that Germany made great leaps within the aerospace industry, particularly some of the specific individuals for overseeing V-weapons production in slave labour camps. The V-weapons, or Würfelpunktwaffen, were a set of long-range artillery weapons developed by the Nazis for strategic bombing during World War II. The effectiveness of these weapons led to the expansion of the program and the development of technology that would change the future of space exploration. Some believe they made use of extraterrestrial technology.
The evidence that was substantiated to the courts during the Nuremberg trials showed that they had drawn flying discs with rotors on them, and eyewitness testimonies from fellow scientists who participated in the project. The project is most commonly known as the Reichsflugschreiber, a saucer-shaped flying machine, but it turns out, unfortunately, that the testimonies given out by Nazi officials involved in this project, detailing individually about the flying saucer project, were fraudulent, and some of the evidence, like for example, the engineering drawings on flying saucer designs, were being burgled.
It has been known that all these kinds of subsequent surreptitious aircraft were being researched, developed and created not only by the Nazis in World War II, but also at Area 51. Conspiracy or fact, this kind of aerospace work is what got Nazi scientists to start the space program in the United States and the Soviet Union. There were other kinds of aircraft the Nazis designed that were used for dropping atomic bombs. Hitler had planned to drop an atomic bomb on New York City, which never happened.
The Horton Ho 229 stealth bomber, also known as the America bomber, and other stealth bombers the Nazis designed were identified mistakenly as UFOs through a photograph taken by Kenneth Arnold on Mount Rainier in Washington State on June 24, 1947.
I can see how some German-designed stealth bombers would have been confused for alien technology. Take the Horton Ho 229, for example. It resembles a flying saucer more than a traditional fighter plane. Described by some as a flying wing, its innovative design does not include a vertical stabilizer or tail fin. The aircraft's reduced size and smooth shape allowed the Horton Ho 229 to be less detectable to radar signals and have less drag, meaning the design would theoretically be lighter and more fuel efficient than a conventionally designed aircraft.
Brothers Walter and Reimer Horton began designing the aircraft in the early 1930s, sparked by an interest in improving the performance of gliders. The first iteration was the Horton H-4, built between 1941 and 1943. In 1943, Hermann Göring, the Reichsminister of Aviation, requested design proposals for a stealth bomber that was able to carry 1,000 kilograms over 1,000 kilometers at 1,000 kilometers per hour. The Horton brothers put forward their flying wing project, arguing that the low drag design would allow the aircraft to meet the 3 × 1,000 range requirement.
We may know for a fact that every scientist and every engineer, British and German both, all had their very own flying saucer designs. Credited as the first to design a flying disc was Joseph Andreas Epp. He was inspired by the Focke-Wulf FW-61, the first functional helicopter in 1938. Epp expanded on this design by devising an aircraft with a circular base and a helicopter rotor attached to the top. He would call this design the helioplane. He created a 1x10 model of the helioplane and sent it to the Ministry of Aviation in Berlin in 1941, with Epp hoping to obtain a contract.
The flying disc project was put under the charge of engineers Rudolf Schriever and Otto Habermohl. Schriever combined elements of Epp's initial design with new technological innovations to build a functioning prototype of a flying disc called the Flugkreisel. Though its first official flight is listed as January of 1945, a photograph allegedly taken by Joseph Ardius Epp when he was working as a consultant for Schriever and Habermohl shows the flying saucer in flight over Prague Airport in August of 1944.
During this time, and working from the same base at Prague Airport, German engineer Richard Miethe and Italian scientist and professor Giuseppe Belluzzo were collaborating on their own flying disc project called the Miethe Discus. The Miethe Discus had an internal rotating jet engine that enabled propulsion and used a ramp and rocket-assisted catapult to take off. But accumulator, I'm unsure if these projects were real and whether any of them were actually successful.
Testimonies from scientists, engineers, and pilots involved design drawings and technical data from physical tests do exist and would suggest some confirmation of truth. However, people can lie and documents can be faked. Take the testimony of Joseph Andreas Epp, for example. The engineer claims that after the end of the war and after the official flying disc projects were abandoned in 1945, he continued his research independently, producing a working model in 1946. Joseph Ardius Epp says that he approached the American authorities with his flying saucer designs, but was rebuffed. He then approached the Soviets and was rejected by them too. In 1956, Joseph Ardius Epp attempted to have his work patented but was met with pushback from the US authorities, which delayed the process for 10 years. Joseph Andreas Epp's story does not seem truthful. The US was incredibly interested in all Nazi designed and built technologies from World War II. In fact, Operation Paperclip saw the US round up and remove to America German engineers and scientists specializing in all fields. Operation Paperclip is a fascinating story in itself, and we will be covering it in a future episode. So why would they be so uninterested in Epp's research and supposed success in creating a flying saucer? It just doesn't sound true, especially since the US was actively researching flying disc technologies in the 1950s and 60s.
If the US rebuffed the work of Epp, they might have worked with Richard Mather, a German engineer in charge of the Mather Discus project. It had been suggested that Mather worked with lead aerospace engineer John Frost, consulting on several designs for Avro Canada's secret projects group. Funded by the US Air Force, Project Silverbug was America and Canada's attempt at a circular aircraft capable of vertical takeoff and landing. It was created in the search for a machine that could be used in the aftermath of a nuclear exchange, where conventional airfields and runways had hypothetically been destroyed.
Project Silverbug was the code name for the Avro car, and 2 prototypes were designed and built in 1959. The Avro car used a single turbo rotor to provide lift and thrust, with its exhaust blowing out the rim of the saucer. The Avro car was successful at hovering and flying just a few meters off the ground, but it was unsuccessful in gaining significant altitude. Because of its lack of results, funding from the US Air Force was pulled and the project was officially terminated in 1961. A decade and a half after the war, with significant resources, computer powers, and teams of engineers, the Americans and Canadians were unable to make a saucer-shaped craft fly. If the US had been consulting with German engineers and had access to their research and machinery, it is highly implausible that the Nazis were able to manufacture a working prototype of a flying saucer in the 1940s. The Avro car failure also proves incorrect the idea that the US had captured Nazi flying saucers around the time of the Roswell incident on Independence Day in 1947 and other UFO sightings. If they had, the Avro car wouldn't have been a failure. The reported UFO sightings must not have been manufactured by the US officials. What we can learn from the Avro car is that there was hardly any use in building flying saucers if they weren't going to fly at all.
So, accumulator. What you were saying is that Joseph Andreas Epp, Rudolf Schriever, Richard Mather, and all other pilots and scientists that spoke about the success of Nazi flying saucers were most likely lying. Though it is plausible that the Nazis experimented with saucer-shaped designs, as they seem to have experimented with every other type of aerial vehicle during World War II, it is unlikely that any Nazi UFOs were actually built and able to take flight. What is more likely is that the biggest developments into flying disc technology was in the 1950s in the US and Canada, before being terminated due to their lack of results.
Though most UFO photographs are real, the photographs of Nazi UFOs in flight were most likely fraudulent, planted amongst documents to falsely authenticate the success of the Nazi experiments. A blast of hot air from a dying movement, desperate for notoriety.
To be honest with you folks, we don't know at this time whether it's all real or all fake. How many amongst you listeners have an opinion? Reach out to us with any theories you might have, and we will continue to hunt for the truth.
Until next time, this has been another episode of
Starlight Network!
One night as a very little boy, I looked at my window beside my bed, seeing something I'd never seen before. A big bright light speeding through the sky like a weird satellite going out of complete control. The time I thought what I really saw was a meteor crashing to Earth. Turns out that the big bright light, as a matter of fact, a shiny glimmer ray. Starlight, not that I imagine a starlight shooting through the sky, a starlight. After my experience, I intend to tell that story to you. Starlight Network.